St. James says this in his epistle: "If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this man's religion is vain. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world." The Epistle of James is a call to holiness. It's a guidebook to practical Christianity that echoes the Sermon on the Mount in many ways. It teaches us that to be a follower of Jesus should make a difference in our lives. Christianity is not only a set of doctrines, but a way of life, and is meant to be practical, not just creedal. James calls us to be doers, not just hearers of the word. And the beauty and power of the Epistle of James is that his call to action is inseparable from his call to holiness. Visiting orphans and widows in their affliction is inseparable from keeping ourselves unstained from the world. And we see this connection in today's reading from James chapter 1. At the beginning of this homily, I read verses 26 and 27. You might have noticed that the lectionary excludes verse 26 from today's reading, but I included it because James himself connects bridling the tongue with visiting orphans and widows. Listen to it again. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this man's religion is vain. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So helping widows and orphans and remaining pure from the stains of the world and charity in our speech are all connected, according to James. They're all equal expressions of our Catholic faith. And I learned this lesson the hard way when I was in 6th grade. A friend and I were walking down the hallway at school gossiping about a classmate named Mike. Mike had not done a single bad thing against us. We just didn't like him. And just as my friend and I were about to turn a corner, I said loudly, "Mike is a complete jerk." And as those words were coming out of my mouth, who came around the corner but Mike? And there we stood, face to face. He looked at me, I looked at him. I saw his anger, I saw his hurt, I saw the embarrassment in his face, and that's when I realized that I was the one who was the total jerk. And that day I learned a lesson I'll never forget about gossip. Saying unkind words about people behind their back is what we call gossip. The Bible has a lot to say about gossip because gossip is a big deal. James tells us that if we think we are religious but cannot control our tongues, cannot control the way we speak to people and whether or not we gossip, he tells us that our religion is in vain. And in fact, almost the entire 3rd chapter of the Epistle of James is about the pain and destruction that the tongue can cause. Let me read you a little bit of it. In James chapter 3, he says, "The tongue is a little member and boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is an unrighteous world among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the cycle of nature, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who are made in the image of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brethren, this ought not to be." The point is that we always need to be careful about what we say and how we say it, especially in relation to one another. This is so important. This is so important that one of the 10 Commandments is devoted to it. The 8th commandment says this: "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." When we gossip, we bear false witness against our neighbor. Gossip is sinful because gossip is uncharitable. Even if what we say about someone is true, it's still unjust to say it behind their back and without their knowledge or permission. When we gossip, we offend the dignity of someone made in the image of God, and therefore, when we gossip, we offend God. According to our catechism, the 8th commandment forbids us from certain behavior, and it requires of us certain other behavior. The 8th commandment requires of us to speak truth in all things, but especially in what concerns the good name and honor of others. Mothers too, but good name of others. And that means preserving and promoting the truth about all persons. Now, preserving and promoting the good name of all persons, promoting and preserving the truth about all persons, and standing for and speaking truth in general. So the positive good that the 8th commandment requires is promoting and preserving the good name of people. The 8th commandment forbids the following negative behavior. It forbids lying, rash judgment, detraction, calumny, and the telling of secrets that we are bound to keep. So what are rash judgment, detraction, and calumny? Rash judgment, we commit rash judgment when, without good reason, we believe something harmful or negative about another's character. In other words, we hear gossip about somebody and we start thinking it's true, even though we have no good evidence for it other than what a gossiper said, put into our ears. That's rash judgment. We commit the sin of detraction when, without good reason, we disclose the hidden faults of another. In other words, we know something, some weakness that someone has or some mistake they made. And rather than keeping that to ourselves to protect their honor and good name, we go blab it around. That's detraction. And we commit the sin of calumny or slander when, by lying, we injure the good name of another. So when are we obliged to keep a secret? Well, we are obliged to keep a secret when we've promised to do so, when the good of another demands it, or when our office requires it, our state in life requires it. For example, as pastor, I must keep confidences very closely, even outside the seal of confession. And there's one last point that I want to drive home. And that's this: if and when we have committed the sin of detraction or calumny, in other words, that's lying about somebody in a way that injures their reputation. That's calumny. When we have done that, which is public, the eighth commandment requires us to repair the harm we've done as far as we're able. So, for example, if we have publicly slandered someone, we must publicly apologize and retract the slander. This is what God requires. Now, it's easy to see that the eighth commandment is one of the most frequently broken commandments in America today, especially in politics and in social media. So if the tongue is a fire that sets the whole world ablaze, how do we bridle our tongue, as James tells us we need to do? How do we bridle it? Well, my mother taught me, if you can't say anything good about someone, don't say anything at all. And that's a good place to start. Socrates practiced what he called the three filters test. The three filters are truth, goodness, and usefulness. So he would apply those to himself. For example, before speaking, he would ask himself whether what he intended to say was true, whether it was good, and whether it was necessary or useful to the conversation. And if he could not answer yes to even one of those questions, he would bridle his tongue. There's other things we can do as well. When we find ourselves in a situation where gossip is happening, and that's really common, as you know, it's really common, we can interrupt the gossip or change the subject. I know of people who, if they know they're going into a situation in which they believe gossip will happen, they prepare ahead of time one or two subject-changing ideas and sort of have them in their back pocket, so to speak. Have them ready. For example, oh, you want to talk about your neighbor again? Well, first, have you seen the last episode of The Chosen? Or another good way to diffuse a situation in which gossip is happening is to refuse to be negative and instead introduce something positive into the conversation about the person who is the target of the gossip. So, for example, oh, you want to talk about your neighbor again? Well, I noticed that your neighbor has beautiful flower beds. Do you like to garden? So, in conclusion, we've all heard our parents or godparents or teachers in school or others say, sticks and stones can break our bones, but words will never hurt us. Well, that saying is helpful to a point. At least it encourages us to de-escalate before we start a fist fight. But we also know that words can hurt, and oftentimes do hurt. And I learned that in 6th grade. If the words we speak about a person are untrue, our words are unjust, and that hurts. And if the words we speak about a person are true but unhelpful, they're embarrassing or shameful, and that hurts also. So the Epistle of James is a call to holiness. It's a guidebook to practical Christianity that echoes the Sermon on the Mount in many ways. It teaches us that Christianity is a way of life. It's not a set of doctrines. And it's meant to be practical, not just creedal. James calls us to be doers, not just hearers of the word. And that includes the words of our tongues. And so in the present age of calumny and rash judgment that we live in here in America, this message is especially important for us today. St. James, pray for us.